goal today, Tom, is to talk about January 6th.
January 6th.
What it meant, what would happen in your life. So let me paint your after the New Year's break, you're back in Washington. It's January, you get back to Washington, January 2021. You know there's a session that's going to be called on January 6th. Kind of walk me through your life. I mean, you're back in the apartment or whatever you are? Because I'm interested, and I think most people are interested about, forget the politics for a second, just your personal odyssey, if you will, for those couple of days.
Those couple of days. Well, obviously, you know, it's a historic time. It was a historic time, and, you know, there was a lot of energy through the post-election period of time. There was a lot of division. The country was very polarized. There was a lot of things going on during that period of time where you had the two camps, you had the two political camps. One, obviously very happy with the results of the election. One camp that was very unhappy with the election results. And you could just feel that building. You could just feel that division as I did our job post-election and traveled the district, traveled the country, traveled the state, and just talking to people and listening to people. And you could just sense that, you know, there was this division out there. And coming back to Washington, D.C. after the first, you know, we got sworn in from the election. So Congress gets sworn in before January 6th, obviously. And so there's a lot of discussion on the floor of what's going to happen. People are discussing the rumors, what you're hearing from police forces and law enforcement and things like that as to the Electoral College vote coming up and all the things that were leading up to the 6th on the, you know, you heard about it on the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and that type of thing. But, you know, Greg, as you look back on it, you know, going into those days, we didn't really anticipate it being what it was on the 6th. It was just another protest. It was just another day where many of us thought it would be just like any other rally at the mall, any other type of situation, just like after when Trump was elected and sworn in on the inauguration. The day after his inauguration, I was in Washington, D.C., and there was thousands of people on the mall that were engaging in a very, you know, the march, the Women's March, or whatever you have it. And you know, that wasn't violent. There was obviously some very aggressive protesting and things like that. And so that's kind of what the anticipation was leading up to the 6th, to be perfectly honest with you. And we have some of the best law enforcement in the entire world. So we, as people who believe in the Capitol Police, we who believe in the ability of Washington, D.C., and our folks there, be it from the D.C. government, the national government, it was just going to be another normal day, to be perfectly honest with you, in the sense of we knew a protest was going to happen, we knew a rally was going to happen, but we did not anticipate what clearly did happen on January 6th.
So that evening, was there a conference call with the Capitol Police? I'm seeing that Capitol Police Chief Steve Sund and the House Sergeant of Arms, Paul Irving, kind of talked about it, and they were just sort of letting Representative Tim Ryan kind of know where things stood. Was there do you have such conferences among the representatives, kind of a pre-January 6th of what kind of the state of affairs were?
No. I didn't participate in one, if you're talking about January 5th or anything like that.
January 5th, yeah.
Yeah, no, there wasn't anything that was highly recommended, or, you know, that, you know, there's always alerts that go out from Capitol Police when we have, you know, bomb threats, things like that. That's not an unusual occurrence that comes through our cell phones and things like that. So that's not anything unusual that happens, whether they have to lock down a building for a suspicious activity or something like that. But there was no prep going up to January 6th, like all the members, mandatory type of briefing with the Capitol Police or the FBI or anybody from D.C. or anything like that, or Secret Service or anything along those lines that I recall. I mean, it could have been briefings, not to say that they didn't have those briefings with members of Congress. It wasn't stressed like we have to have this briefing this is what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And this is get ready for
So
it.
really no general knowledge, as you're really driving up to or taxiing over to the Capitol that morning.
Yeah, so I mean, I obviously, I live close to the Capitol where I walk to work. And that day we actually drove into work. My chief of staff was there. He was staying near my place. I'm just thinking back in my own recollection here, live over near the ballpark. That's where I'm at. So he picked me up. He was over on that side of town. Drove in, and we had a meeting that morning at 9 o'clock, business as usual, with a group of members off campus. And we were just talking about upcoming events that we were trying to plan for the summer and what we were going to do for the couple of votes that were coming up and things like that. I also, that night on January 5th, I did get some emails from, there were a lot of people that wanted me to vote against the Electoral College certification. So I had county chairs. There was 9 of them that had emailed me, or 8 of them that emailed me at 1 o'clock in the morning that wanted me to oppose the Electoral College. They knew that I had come out against doing that. I believe that the Electoral College Constitution called for me not to do that. And so they were quite upset with me, and they wanted to talk to me. So I remember emailing them at 3 o'clock in the morning. I convened a meeting with them at 8 o'clock. Actually, 8 o'clock was our meeting with the Main Street Partnership, and then 9 o'clock was the meeting with the county chairs, and to just tell them where I was coming from in regards to my vote, my interpretation of the Constitution, and why I was going to vote not to object to the Electoral College. And so that was kind of the discussions I was focused on that day, rather than, anything of what happened on January 6th that morning.
So really, those things are happening in the morning. Yeah. And what is the first sort of official part of it when you kind of enter the chambers? What time is that?
So that happened later in the afternoon. That was later in the afternoon. So, I'm in the office. So I go into the office after having those meetings. So it's now about 11 o'clock, 10:30, after talking to the county chairs, somewhere around there. Get to the office, just kind of doing the same thing, making phone calls. Our schedules are pretty tight. And then we're watching, I always have the TV on in the office, so watching the news, watching, usually I watch the business channels. I'm not a Fox News, MSNBC guy. I'm more of a Fox Business, CNBC, Squawk Box type of guy. So we had that stuff on in the background, and so we're watching that, and then you start to see the rally, because that started at noon. So, so that was interesting. If you really actually want to know some interesting history going around that day, because we're just like everybody else, we're normal people. So the other thing that was interesting that morning of the 6th and the 5th was my water heater had gone out at my apartment that we own down there. And so I was in the middle of, I went over to my chief. He was staying at a hotel over on that side of the town, because my water I didn't have hot water. So I went over to his, now it's all coming back to me, went over to the Marriott that's adjacent to my place, and all the Trump folks are there, because all the hotels were filled up, and they were like, you could tell they were pumped up. You could tell, because they had overtaken the hotel in regards to being there. They had all their signs and everything else, so we ran into them, and I had to take a shower there because I didn't have any hot water at my apartment. And that's how we drove in together and did those 2 events, and then went to the thing. But I watched the rally on the mall, and that was at noon, and didn't watch all of it per se, because by the time the rally was kind of wrapping up, that's when we convened on the floor to start doing the Electoral College debate and that type of thing. So that's about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I think.
At that moment in time where the buzzer or light goes on and says, time to come, Mr. Congressman. Mm-hmm. Did you get a sense what was going on outside of the Capitol at that point? No. I mean, the president still kind of wrapping up his talk. Yeah. And
No, I had no sense of that. I mean, you had the rally on the mall, so you're watching him give the speech, and and I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm like, that's a pretty aggressive speech. And I had talked to the president on that Monday, because we had been doing a lot of work on the repeal vote that was on the floor and the veto that we were trying to override on the NDAA and the Section 230 repeal that deals with internet privacy issues. So I talked to the president on that Monday, and then then Wednesday watched, and so I saw him on the speech, and I could, he was pretty animate. He was quite upset about the election results, obviously, and he wanted his folks to express themselves up on during the Electoral College process. And so I watched that speech, and I was concerned. It was a rhetoric that was pretty aggressive. Let's put it that way. And so, but it wasn't. But I've been to a bunch of Trump rallies, and I've been to, through the election process, and it wasn't anything that was like extreme. And I know the president. I know him personally, and I know when he speaks, and I know how he speaks, and I know kind of like when he says things, what he's intending and what he's not intending. And sometimes people take what he says, like he always says to me, Tom, oh, we're New Yorkers, Tom. People get us. And I'm like, well, not all New York, not everybody's a New Yorker. I'm a New Yorker, and sometimes I don't get you. I'm not a Queens, New Yorker type of guy. I'm a Western New Yorker. So I kind of watched the speech, and I said, oh, it's getting pretty aggressive. And but I didn't see anything in the crowd that like concerned me from anything of a normal Trump rally, because I know a lot of those people, and I know that a lot of people that go to the Trump rally, they're picking up the garbage. They're not extremists. They're just there to engage. And sometimes, and a lot of the Trump rallies, I mean, they're entertaining. I mean, they can be very fun when you go to them, having been to them. So anyway, watched that, went to the floor. So everything that was going on, from my perspective on the floor at that time, was nothing unusual. I will tell you, I did have a conversation with one of our chairs during that chair meeting that kind of caught me a little off guard, where I was talking to her, and she's like, well, I know Mike Pence is going to overturn the Electoral College. I know that because I'm connected to people down in D.C. And I'm like, I served with Mike Pence. And I know Mike Pence, and I know who he is, and I'm like, that's not going to happen. I'm telling you right now, that's not going to happen. And it was clear that wasn't going to happen. And so when I went up to the floor and walked onto the floor, knowing that the vice president wasn't going to do that, I didn't know how that was going to go over, to be perfectly honest with you, because that was the first time where I'm like, oh, these people have an expectation that clearly is not going to happen. That was the only thing where I was like, that could be volatile, because if they're under the impression the vice president's going to do one thing, and then that letter came out. As I was walking in the floor, that's when the letter was going out. So we're getting everything from the text, and I'm just like, well, now we know this isn't going to go the way that a lot of people back home think it's going to go, with the vice president not objecting. And but I was still of the mindset, it's what happened still wasn't even comprehended in my mind. And so, we let it at that. We were on the floor listening to things, but you had no idea that was going on. So
Congress meets in joint session to confirm Joe Biden's electoral victory at 1:05. I'm reading a timeline here. And there's lots of reports of demonstrators. Then Chief Sund asked House Sergeant of Arms Paul Irving and Senate Sergeant of Arms Mike Stenger to declare an emergency and call for the deployment of the National Guard. And at some point, when you're in the joint session or in a session, because there was that objection, there was an objection, then did you actually split and go into your House chambers?
Yeah, so you got to understand, it wasn't like we were all brought to the floor at the same time.
Okay.
Okay, because, I still had some stuff I was doing at the office. I'm watching the speech on the ellipse. I'm still working, doing my stuff. And then I'm like, I got my work done. Then I went over to the floor, and I think by the time I got to the floor, the Senate had already broke off. I had gone to the first objection for the states to hear the 2-hour debate where the Senate went to its chamber. We stayed in our chamber. And so I was there, and then listened to about 45 minutes of that, and then I had to take care of another matter back at the office. So what I did at that point in time is I left the floor and remember, you wouldn't know this, but my office is literally right across the street from the Capitol, like right on the corner. So I'm right across the street on Independence Ave, and I always walk outside, generally walk outside. So what I did at about, so we just broke off, they went into the Senate chamber, the senators. We were in the House chamber. I'm sitting there at the floor, and I'm like, okay, I got to go over and take care of a couple things back at the office. So I left, walked out the Capitol side near the Supreme Court side, Library of Congress side. And as I was walking outside, you could hear the chants coming up on the other side of the Capitol from the White House side, from Pennsylvania Avenue. And you could hear the noise. And as I'm walking across to go to my office in Longworth, that's when like the phone lit up, things like that. And that's when they locked down all the buildings. That's when they wouldn't let people in. You could hear them coming up. And that's when I heard, as I'm next to Longworth, you hear the flashbangs. I thought they were shotgun blasts going off. Come to find out they were the flashbang devices. Mm-hmm. And you could hear that on the other side of the Capitol, between the Capitol and the White House, in the front of the Capitol. And then I'm like, oh, this is definitely, and you could see the people coming around, and they were coming around from the Senate side primarily, though there were some people coming up the House side. So if you know how it's laid out, House side, Senate side, going out this way, Pennsylvania Ave to the White House, they came up this way, and most of them came around the Senate or through the front, but some started bleeding off to the House side, coming up towards Longworth, Rayburn, that way, up to the Capitol. And I'm over here in Longworth, and I'm like, I got to get, and my chief's like, you got to get inside. You got to, and the Capitol Police are like, you get to your office. That's the emergency protocol. It's locked down in the office. So then that's when I went to the backside of Longworth, all the way around Longworth to get into the 24-hour door, and they're all locked. And so obviously the Capitol Police know us. We have our pins and our badges. So I showed my ID, and they let us in and opened up the door and let us in. And then I went to the office and locked the door, did the lockdown protocol, sat in my office, and watched it on TV like everyone else.
So that's your communication at that point, is really through the media.
Through media and texting. I contacted my best friend in Congress is Josh Gottheimer, my co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. So Josh called me. We were trying to talk to each other. He called me. He was on the floor, and they got escorted from the floor through the tunnels underneath Independence Ave. I'm outside on Independence Ave going to Longworth. They were in the tunnels, went to Longworth to the Ways and Means Committee, that I serve on. And that's the alternative House chamber that can house the House and the Senate. So that is in Longworth, right below my office. And that's where they were locked down for the duration of the event. But we checked in with each other. I said, I'm fine, you're fine, that's good. You're safe and secure.
Did you know what was going on through means other than the media about Speaker's office being breached and all of that stuff?
No. I mean, you got texts on your phone because they have the emergency alert system, like buildings locked down, suspicious activity. That's the limit of the communication. So we're no different than everybody else. And the police, I mean, they were doing the best they could. When I was outside and seeing the police interacting, these people, starting to come around, you're interacting with thousands of people. There was about 300 to 400,000 people there on the mall. And I will tell you that, what came up around the Capitol, there was tens of thousands of people, and then there's a few thousand that obviously breached the Capitol and came into the chamber, and chambers both in the Senate and the House. But there was no coordination with members and Capitol Police coming to, so I got to get each member or anything like that. It was just get to your office and lock down and stay in your office.
So you're there with your staff?
My chief of staff. Now, what they did do that day, because they they're like, we highly recommend telecommuting or whatever. So they a lot of staff, we said, stay home. And we're already doing COVID-19 protocols, so not a lot of people coming into the office or anything like that. So a lot of the staff stayed at their houses or their apartments and just telecommuted that day. So my chief, we had one other staff assistant, myself. We were watching this in real time pretty much from my office in D.C. The other thing that was important to me and to my chief of staff, Joe Rizzo, is we wanted to make sure the staff was okay, because you didn't know what was going on back home in the district offices. You didn't, at that point in time, it's like, now this is getting real. You start seeing them breaking through the Capitol. So you got talking to Josh, I'm talking to my family. My family, I got 11 older brothers and sisters, so they're all text chains start firing off, like, what's going on? Are you okay? That type of thing. So we made sure my family knew we were okay. Will, my son, and my wife were eating lunch at the Red Robin when it came across the TV, and they're like, "What's, are you okay?" The shots fired, that type of thing. So we made sure they knew we were okay, and then we convened a whole staff call with everybody on our staff. So we have, approximately 30 people on staff, just so everybody knew, we're okay. We're in the office in D.C. How are you guys doing at the office? Make sure, because by that time, you had reports going out that is this thing bigger than D.C.? Are things happening in the district offices? Are there targets there that have to be addressed? And so we just wanted to make sure people knew, anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call the police. If you're uncomfortable, go home. And we just communicated with our staff that in the afternoon.
Think about this. When you drove in January 6th, within hours, you're in a lockdown, social media mode, watching the media, wondering what is happening.
Yeah, it was, I will never forget it. It was a day I never thought I would see in the history of America. And I was in tears. I mean, I literally was in tears. My chief came in, he's like, look at it, we're supposed to close the windows, and the window shades. I'm like, no, this doesn't happen in America. I'm being stubborn at that point in time, and I'm just like in tears, because I'm like, that building represents so much. It represents so much to not just us, but to the world. And I'm like, and I know that chamber. I've been in the Senate chamber. I was on the Senate floor with my best friend from Congress, Cory Gardner, who lost his reelection, about 3 nights before that, right after we got sworn in. We had an event in his office to wish him well, and we went to the Senate floor, all of us that came together, Jamie Rivera Butler, Martha Roby, myself, and a couple other folks. And we were on the floor of the Senate, right where those people were sitting on the chair.
Yeah.
And destroying the place. And we're there to just see one of my colleagues who was a senator, just to kind of reminisce about how we came in together and he was leaving. And just, it was sad, because that chamber, that building, it means so much to so many people, not just America, but the world. And to see that is just, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And then to see the violence, to see the physical desecration of the place, to see where the woman was shot. That's 50 feet. That's not even 50 feet. That's like 20 feet. The women's room is right there off the chamber. These things are close. This isn't like distant away from where the State of the Union's given. If people have a idea what the chamber is, when the president walks in, that happened right there. And the other thing which was impactful, was we were always taught from day one, the chamber is the most secure place in the entire world. You need to understand those chairs are reinforced with Kevlar. Those walls can withstand a bomb blast. And so to see people potentially breaching not only the House chamber, but to literally be crawling over the Senate, I couldn't believe it.
The police get control of the facility. They, at some point, do you get an alert that's saying, stay tuned, we may be reconvening here soon?
Yeah, so that, we get that kind of later in the evening. Obviously there's hours of, you don't know what's going on. You're just watching on TV like everybody else. But it's literally, 1,000 yards away from where I'm sitting in my office. And so throughout the day, they're obviously taking care of other things, they being the police, Capitol Police, the House leadership, House and Senate leadership. There was discussion where people are texting each other, communicating with each other's members, like, should we go to the alternative site because they have an off-site facility that can house the House and Senate to do the job? And there was like a quick type thing where people were just like, no, we need to go back to the floor. We need to go back in the Capitol. And so that message was not organized in an organized fashion communicated. It was communicated though that most members were like, no, we can't let this stand. We need to go there and finish tonight. So that's what we did.
I'm visioning the moment when you walk back into the chambers and you see your fellow colleagues who've been likewise locked down, what the initial conversations were.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's why we're all kind of like traumatized in our own way. I was extremely emotional. I was, because of witnessing that on TV and just like, what just happened to us in America? And I was talking to Josh quite a bit at that point in time, like, we got to do something. We founded the Problem Solvers Caucus. We are the only group of people in a bipartisan way that get together on a regular basis. We are the only ones that are recognized in D.C., and we just got the $900 billion COVID relief bill done. We were responsible for getting that done, widely recognized for that work. And so I'm like, Josh, I'm going to try to get us time. I'm going to try to get us time to talk. But this is all going on at like 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. We're trying to reconvene. I forget what time it was, but it was later in the evening. And then he's like, well, I think we definitely want to say something where we can show the country that we're still American. That's what we are. Mm-hmm. And so as we walked back to the floor, I can remember, I was pretty worked up, running on a lot of emotional energy. And I walked on the floor and I'm like looking for time because there's only so much time we were going to debate. And we went back, if you recall, we went back to debate the Electoral College objections. And so there was a formal process that was afoot. And I went up to Jim Jordan and I'm like, and he was controlling the time on the Electoral College objections. I'm like, Jim, I want time. Do you have any time to give? And he's like, well, are you going to vote? Are you going to speak in objection, in support of objection, or not objecting? I'm not objecting. Can you give me some time? I just want a couple minutes. And he's like, and then we got into a little, I wouldn't say an argument. It wasn't an argument. It was, I can't believe you guys are going forward with this. I mean, I just cannot comprehend that you guys are going to double down on this. I mean, Mitch McConnell at that point in time was getting around that, yeah, he was going to complete his process in the Senate with no more debate. They were just going to close it up. That's it, shut it down. And then the House was going to continue to raise these objections to multiple states. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, after what just happened, done. This is done. This is pro forma now. There's no more going through this. This is get the deal done. Transition of power happens now, peacefully. These guys don't win. So I went to Jim and had that little thing, and then I tried to get some time from other people on our side, and then I went over to the other. I go, Josh, do you see if you can get some time over on your side, because you got to get time from Republicans or Democrats, and this is when I just happened to be walking in the back of the chamber, and I went to Liz Cheney because I crossed her. I go, listen, I'm looking for time. Do you have any time? And this isn't something I've said publicly, but I will say it. Liz gave me her 5 minutes. She had 5 minutes of time. And it was just fortuitous. I just happened to be walking across the back of the chamber, and I just happened to come across her, and I was looking for time from people, and I was told, you got to get it from somebody who has it. And somebody mentioned Liz, so I'm like, I'll go get Liz. And the ironic thing is the Democrats had given her the 5 because she obviously voted for impeachment.
Yeah.
She was looking as, they were looking at her as a friendly voice from the Democratic side. So once I got that 5 minutes secured from Liz, my whole role at that point in time was to get Josh and tell Josh, hey, he's like, you got time? How'd you get time? Because we were thinking we may be able to get 1 minute to do something. I go, look, I got us 5 minutes. And so he's like, holy cow. He's like, and we're looking at each other, and he's like, well, when do you think we're going to go? He's like an hour or two? And I'm like, I think we're going like third. We're going like right now. And he's a speechwriter from Bill Clinton's years. So he likes to have his speeches all written out and all that stuff. I go, John, we don't have time. We don't have time for that. We're like going like pretty soon here. And so he went out back to write down what he wanted to say. He's more of a longhand guy. I'm just kind of like thinking in my mind, what am I going to say with this time that we have, and what are we going to do, just to try to prepare for it. And again, we're running on emotional energy, him and I, and so we work it all out with who's going to go, get the order, and then I. I'm laughing now. It wasn't laughing at the time. But there's a special way during the Electoral College process that you have to, when you get recognized, you got to be recognized in the appropriate way from a parliamentarian. It's like silly, but I could care less about that at this point in time. But you have to do it right, else you could get screwed up. So I wrote that down, and I have that piece of paper at my office because they're like, because I had to say it right. I rise in objection to to oppose the objection to the Electoral College, or whatever the language was that you have to do in order to get recognized properly. But so I wrote that down. Josh came over. We're sitting on the front of the dais there, and we're like, I go, look, I think what I should do is I should come across the aisle, because we're all about bipartisanship. We're all about coming together. And that's when we first, right there, we're sitting there, like going up in about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And that's when we first decided, we should do something symbolic, not just talk. And I said, well, why don't I come across the aisle? And that's like treason. I mean, that's like a northern soldier, I guess, going to the southern camp, or the southern camp coming to the northern camp. It's not, and that ain't cool. Yeah. In the chamber. And so that's where we got recognized, and I said, no, I guess the rest is history. You saw what I guess we did. I got up, everyone's watching, and that's the other thing that really...
Well, explain that a little bit, because it may be history to you, but I'm not sure that anybody who may see this in the history would understand it.
Yeah, because we always speak from the chamber. The Republicans are on the right-hand side, I have the right, and the Democrats are on the left-hand side, of the left, And so you speak from your side of the chamber, and you don't cross over that aisle.
I see, okay.
Okay, so you don't cross over that aisle. That middle aisle where the president walks down for the State of the Union, that's the middle aisle. You don't cross over that. I mean, you cross over and talk, you can walk across it, you're free to do it. But it's just the tradition of the House is that's like, you stay on your side, I stay on my side, and we have the discussions from Republican and Democratic point of view. So when I'm sitting there, and Josh and I are sitting together, like talking, like what are we going to say? What do you? Because we got 5 minutes, and I have to split the time with him. So I'm like, listen, I'm going to walk across to you, and then I'll yield some of my time to you, so that you're using part of my 5 minutes, because you don't just get 5 minutes and then you just. Okay, now you get 5 minutes. It's not, you have to use that time. And I'm sitting there and like debating what we're going to do. And then I'm listening to my colleague from Alabama, Mo Brooks, and I'm like, are you kidding me? He's talking about objecting to, I think it was Arizona or Pennsylvania, whatever the state was. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he's objecting to the Electoral College, and he is a known... Illegal immigration is a very passionate issue for him. And he is railing on illegal immigrants and illegal aliens, and just railing in hard right rhetoric on that issue. And this is the first presentation to the country after we convene Like that's like the second conversation, the third speech after Steny went and Kevin McCarthy went. Like after the leadership went, the real first rank and file member of the Republican Party is railing on illegal aliens. After the Capitol had just been attacked and we had that insurrection, you know, where they literally had a gallows. I mean, they had a gallows out on the Capitol grounds where they were going to hang people. You know, when I first saw it, I'm thinking, oh, this is part of the prop, this is part of the protest. But they literally, come to find out after looking into this, they were there with zip ties, and the actual mission was to take people like Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, the chain of succession of command for the transition of power, and literally hang them in ropes and gallows that was brought up to the Capitol. And Mo is talking about illegal aliens when the blood, I mean, when I walked down the chamber floor, the blood was still there from the lady who was shot and killed. I mean, that's like right there. I mean, it's right outside the door. And I'm listening to that. I'm like, how can you be talking about that right now to the country? The country doesn't want to hear about that. It's like, what are you guys going to say about what just happened? And so that's why I really was reinforced, like, God, I really think I need to come across, from my perspective, from the Republican Party's perspective, I need to give the visual of me coming to you. And he's like, you sure you want to do that? Because that, again, it's treason. That's toxic. And I said, yeah, we want to do it. And so I got up, started the speech, walked across the aisle, and gave that speech. And, you know, I went over there and I said, look, I'm a proud Republican. And there were some people like, oh my gosh, they thought maybe I was going to go over there and become a Democrat on the spot and all that stuff. But you know, I came over and I said, no, I'm a proud Republican. I believe in my Republican ideas. I'm going to fight for my Republican ideas. And I know Josh is a proud Democrat, and he's going to fight for his ideas. But I went over there and we stood together as Americans. And we stood there as Americans to say the mob is not going to win. We're going to stand up to the mob. And we're going to settle our disputes at the ballot box. I talked about how my father, you know, World War II vet, Korea vet. He lost his blood, and it's still in Europe, it's still in Korea. He taught me, you know, America's what it's all, you know, that you fight for. And in that moment, that night, I mean, I was worked up, Josh was worked up. We stood together, and I would just tell you, there were people in that chamber that came up to us afterwards. I mean, we were hugging. I mean, I was crying again. I was emotional. They were like, thank you. Thank you for doing what you did. Both of us. Thank you for saying what you said. Thank you for doing what you did. You stood up to that mob. You stood up to what we believe in, the peaceful transition of power. And I walked off the floor in tears. I was shaking. I called my wife. I mean, she's like, I just watched that speech, and she was crying. And she's just like, what you and Josh did. I got texts from people all over the country. People I didn't even know. My daughter's roommate from college was thanking me, who I never, you know, not roommate, but a roommate's friend was thanking me through her for doing what we did. You know, just so much positive feedback from that moment. And then we just walked off the floor and went back to the office and just prayed for the future of the country.
State seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as a proud Republican, I rise in opposition to the objection to the electors.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I come to this side of the aisle as a proud Republican, but most importantly, as a proud American. Today we saw an assault on our democracy. I love this institution. I love the United States Congress. And I love the United States of America. And what I saw today was mob rule that spat upon the blood of my father, that is in the soil of Europe and in the soil of Korea, and who gave us, through that blood, this sacred Constitution and the sacred ability to lead this world as a power that says we settle our differences not with mob rule. We settle our differences through elections. And when those elections are over, we have a peaceful transition of power. Now, make no mistake to my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle. I will be passionate in my disagreement with you. I will be passionate in my ideas for the future of this country. And I will fight for my Republican ideas that I hold near and dear. But I will stand with you tonight and send a message to the nation and all Americans that what we saw today was not American, and what we see tonight in this body shall be what we do in America, and that is to transfer power in a peaceful way. And with that, I yield to my best friend in Congress and a Democrat, Josh Gottheimer, my co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus.
I'd like-
So how much time do we have left?
I thank my friend for yielding and for standing with me and with all of us. Tom Reed is my co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. He's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. When it comes to policy views, we often disagree, but at the end of the day, we are united as Americans. My good friend like me always puts country first. Today, a group of lawless thugs sought to upend the Constitution and the peaceful transition of power because they didn't like the outcome of the presidential election. So they tried to nullify it using improvised explosives, shattering windows, breaking down doors, injuring law enforcement, and even tearing down the American flag that rises above this beacon of democracy. But their attempt to obstruct democracy failed. Their insurrection was foiled. The American people and the greatest democracy the world has ever known won. Abraham Lincoln, who served in this very body, famously said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." That's why, for the sake of this country, we must stand together, united, and celebrate a peaceful transition of power. In 14 days, President-elect Biden will be sworn in, and despite all of our differences, I have faith that for the American people, we will come together, Democrats and Republicans, committed to unity, civility, and truth. We will recognize our higher purpose to help America through these dark days. That is the only way we will beat COVID, rebuild our economy, and stand up to threats at home and abroad. Working together as Democrats and Republicans, I know our best days will always be ahead of us. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to always search their conscience and their souls. And I respect my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues. But today, let us pause and remember what happened here today. Let us pause that our tenure in this Congress will far surpass the time that we stay here. And let us pass and cast our votes today, recognizing that what we do here today will set the course of this institution for years to come. And this institution, Madam Speaker, shall not fail, because the United States of America shall forever be the beacon of hope, the inspiration to all, and may God bless our great country. I yield back.
What was the night? There was some concluding moments of that evening when ultimately the election is confirmed, and there was that finality, and Mike Pence makes the announcement. Were you in your office watching that, or where were you at that moment?
So at that moment, by that time, I was back at the office, and like everything else, watched that come to a conclusion, watched it hammered down, and then just exhausted. And went to bed. And it's like 4 in the morning, I think it was by that time. So then just went back home and went to bed. But it was surreal, Greg. It's just not something I ever wanted to see happen in America, and it was something where it was also it was sad throughout the day, but also it reminded me how precious America is, and it also reminded me how strong America is. Because even with that ugliness of that day, we still did it. We still finished the job. You have a new president, and we move forward. And the mob rule did not succeed in America. You know, and we got a lot of work to do. I mean, there's damage as a result of January 6th. That could be a couple-hour meeting with you to discuss and how we're going to heal and how we're going to get through all that, and how the world now looks at us a little bit differently. Like in America, you know, no one in the world, we talk to our colleagues around the world, and they're like, never thought we'd see that in America. But that tells you how broken we are right now, but it also tells you how strong we are, because we still did it. We didn't fall apart. And that gives me hope. That gives me a commitment to get up and do it each and every day. To say, not going to give up. Not going to give up on it. I'm going to keep fighting for it. And that's the country.
I assume you watched some of the proceedings, and I'm not asking you to necessarily comment on the finality of the proceedings, but they showed a lot of evidence of what was going on with the Congress people, and movies and security cameras. And as you're watching that, some of that perhaps for the first time, the security camera aspect of it, did it give you a greater sense of gravity of how close these folks who breached the Congress were to you and others?
No, because I mean, obviously, I know that building. I know where they went. So I mean, I know all those nooks and crannies that everyone now have seen in the videos and post events. And I know where that woman was killed. I know where the gunshots went off. I know where the glass was broke. They were on the floor. They were there in the Capitol. But it also showed to me that, you know what, they weren't going to be successful. They weren't going to be successful. And I think it was, regardless of what happened that day, even if they did execute and did everything that they planned to do, you know, because then the post afterwards, you find out a lot of it was planned, a lot of it had already been pre-orchestrated, bringing up those gallows and going and hanging those people. Because America, we have plans of secession, we have plans to go through peaceful transition of power, even if they had gotten the Electoral College and the piece of paper. We'd still have processes, because we have an election process. We have a constitution. It's a piece of paper, but it's a principle. It's a philosophy of freedom and democracy. So yeah, they may have delayed things. They may have caused things to horrific. Would have been much worse, and death and everything else. But we still would have gone through a transition of power. And this whole theoretical, and how some minds got twisted in believing that this coup, because it was an attempted coup in their mind, how they thought they could successfully pull this off, just tells you that there are some minds out there that you and I will never really comprehend, but that you and I need to be very much aware is out there. And that these minds, and mind you, these minds, some of them, a lot of them, are very reasonable people. They're very educated people. And they get caught up in the moment. They get caught up in that mentality. And before you know it, people that you would go to church with, that you would go and look as retirees who work for, you know, in a factory job or a law profession, all of a sudden now they got a mindset and a belief structure that I sit there and I'm like, how can you, of all people, not pointing at you, but figuratively, how can you believe that that is something that we're going to do in America to deal with the election of a president or transition of power or something along those lines? And it reminds me often when I think about it, how fragile democracy is. You know, the old saying, you know, we're but one generation away from losing our democracy. That's why learning civics, learning the Constitution, learning and passing that on, and how much you have to fight for that democracy each and every generation is so important, because it can be taken away, not because of some physical battle per se, or one act, but it could be taken away from all of us if we don't stand up for it.
Sounds like the mission statement of the Robert H. Jackson Center.
Yeah, I guess he's a very wise man, right? I mean, he understood that. You know that.
Good segue, we'll use that.
Yeah.
As you were driving up today, or at least a couple days ago, they said, Greg Peterson called and he's interested in talking about that one day in time. What was your reaction? Like, really?
Yeah, because I mean, I know you, I know the center, and I know your commitment to history. So I appreciate you memorializing that day in time and like how that day went down, and putting it in context of we're just normal people. Robert Jackson is just a human being like you or I. You put your pants on one leg at a time, and you get up in the morning. You don't know what's going to happen to you that day by the time the day goes by. And so I figured that's what this was about. That's what this was trying to encapsulate. But it was also recognizing that January 6th is going to be part of our history that's going to be taught to us. It's going to be taught to the next generation, the generation that's going to be here in America well past our time when we're sleeping in our graves. And I just hope it's a lesson that teaches a lot of people of how important that building is, but how important the Constitution is, and what we have here in America, and how precious it is when it comes to democracy and when it comes to the freedom that is represented there.